Welcome to another episode of the Stop Doing Stupid Stuff podcast, where we challenge outdated norms and spark forward-thinking conversations. Today, hosts Andreas Wieman and Tim dive into a topic that's sparking global debates: the power of shorter work weeks with a focus on outcomes, not just attendance. Inspired by a fascinating article from CNN by Olesya Dmitracova titled "The Impact of a Shorter Work Week with a Focus on Outcomes," this discussion explores real-world results from Iceland's bold experiment, where 51% of workers embraced shorter hours and the economy thrived. Buckle up for insights, data, and a healthy dose of disruption as we rethink how we work in 2024 and beyond.
Hey, amazing listeners. Welcome to another Stop Doing Stupid Stuff podcast with your amazingly talented, great voiced hosts, myself, Andreas Wieman, and Tim's tagging along with me as well.
I was waiting for that one.
So Tim, again, on the continued path of passionate things that we've talked about in the past few, want to tee this one up for us and let us know what the folks are in for?
Yeah, well, the less talented member of the team here, me, definitely want to continue our conversation about, as you know, those of you who've been listening, we've had this kind of ongoing beef about this focus on attendance, 40 hours a week, 5 days a week, 8 to 5. And is that really what's critical? And are we measuring attendance or are we measuring outcomes? And the answer is, at least on the surface, it appears like a lot of this is about attendance. And maybe it becomes a reason or a methodology to reduce staff. There's been a lot of conversations about that. But on the flip side, we'd like to talk about today really is what happens when you start really focusing on outcomes. And people are like, well, what do you mean by that? And I think one thing to look at is, do you need a 40-hour week to get the things done that the business or the organization needs to be successful? And short work weeks are not a new thing. They're not a pandemic thing. We were doing this back in the 80s and, some of them were successful and some of them were less successful. Sometimes the argument against a 4-day work week is, well, geez, my customers need me there 5 days a week or 7 days a week. And I agree with that. You have to adapt the organization to what the outcomes necessary for success are. Now, if you need to be there on, 7 days a week, then you need to make sure that you're there 7 days a week. Doesn't mean your employees have to work 7 days a week. And you need to provide a way for employees to feel like they get the balance that they need between their work and their personal lives so that they can be 100% engaged in their work. Oh, what do you mean by that? So, as we talked a couple of weeks ago, there was a great study done earlier in the year that showed that on average, only 30% of employees worldwide are engaged in the work they do. And people say, well, the US is going to be much better than that. And you go, yeah, no, the US is right about the average, 30%. And what does that mean? That means 70% of your labor dollars are pretty much wasted. So if I can find a way to engage my existing workforce in the work that they're doing, even by increasing it from 30% to 50%, I'm getting a significant benefit to my bottom line and to the experience that my customers are going to get from me, which will hopefully result in revenue retention or service retention. So anyway, I wanted to go into some specific detail where people have actually done this and what the data is around that. So there's an article published earlier in the year in CNN by Olesya Dmitracova from CNN. I want to make sure she gets the credit for it. That is London. And in particular, they were talking about a study that was done in Iceland, where between 2020 and 2022, they had 51% of the workers in the country accepted offer of shorter working hours, including a 4-day week. And so as a result, everybody would go, oh, okay, that's great. Good for them. Small country in the middle of the North Atlantic, but considered one of the richer countries in the Economic Union, EU, European Union. And what happened as a result of this study? Well, some pretty interesting data. So faster economic growth than most of the other countries in the EU. They had the increase in economic growth. It had thousands of people involved in this. And as a result, they had an economic expansion by 5%, which put them in the top, second only to Malta. So I think what I'm trying to say here is that whatever you're trying to measure, make sure that we're focusing on the things that matter. I mean, yes, I think attendance is important, but what are we saying? Is it attendance at an office and a location so that I can checkbox that you showed up and you stood there and spent 8 hours in the location? Or am I really focused on, did you get the work done that I've asked you to get done and what was the quality of that work? And I think it's the second. I'm sorry, I
Well,
have a biased opinion here.
well, and what was the outcomes? So we get more to an objectively measurable system, and less subjective. But if going back to the study that you quoted around the engagement level being around 30%, the other piece of information or data that was in there is the generational folks that make up either Gen X or prior, and then some of the Gen Z, Gen Y folks, right? And there's a difference in coming up in that analog-ish type of environment with the bleed over into digitalization. And then you have these younger generations that are just more digital first. That's all they know. And so some of the other data that I think showed in there is that they felt like they were less engaged because there were still a lot of antiquated practices kind of going on, like older school interaction. You had to be there, right? It's 2024. It's virtual, and you got Zoom, you've got Google Meets, you've got, all of these other tools out there that can recreate, that situation and collaboration without physical presence, having to be had. And I would say a lot of these younger generation folks are coming out during the pandemic. They went to school during this, and they're coming out in their professional careers, in the work at home virtual environment. And now there's a reversion, in some places, of return to office. And so it's a bit foreign to a large segment of the population, is kind of the point that I'm trying to make, right? And so when you look at introducing, and the concept has been around for a while, 4-day work weeks, right? We could work 10-hour
Yeah,
days, 4 days a
four
week.
tens. Yeah. I mean, to your point, I mean, it's not new. The question is, what are you getting out of it?
Well,
Yeah.
the other piece that I'm trying to get at too with the generational difference is, why don't we step back and say, okay, the data shows that the younger generations feel less engaged. All right. Well, why do they feel less engaged? Because we're managing the same way that we managed them pre-pandemic, and they're not used to that. And so what can you do, or what is the feedback the newer generations have given us of saying, well, here's what engagement means to us. And it means less of engaging with us directly at work on work topics and more about my own personal growth and development, even if it's outside of this company. That was like taboo coming up. When we were coming up, it was like, nope, you're loyal to the company, you'll stay here with the company. I'm going to give you the skills and resources that are going to help, mature the company upward. Now it's like, well, no, I want to take these skills, and if I feel like I want to go open my own business and do that, I want to be able to do that. And so you've got to balance all of this. And by the way, I'm not saying any of this is easy. What I'm saying is you've got to balance all of it to say, okay, well, if I have a newer Gen Y person that I'm onboarding and I want to get productivity out of them, but they're also telling me, hey, I want you to, pass along your experience, your professional experience to me, but I also want to learn about this subject. And then I can engage with them and say, okay, well, here's how this subject can be related back to the business that you're doing today with our company, with our organization. But here's also how you can use it in your personal life, how you can use it in your own professional life, even if it's outside of trying to demonstrate it here, in
Yep.
these confines. And then you can say, oh, well, guess what? You're only going to schedule 36 hours a week instead of 40 hours a week. I'm going to pay you 40 hours a week, but you're only going to work 36 hours a week. The other 4 hours, go study this subject on your own. Here's some classes, here's some online classes, here's some whatever. And that way you're acknowledging, what they're telling to you, what's important to them. You're reciprocating it by finding solutions. And then I think the effort that you get back, you guys have probably heard me say this a few times before, the volunteered effort, because of that interaction and that engagement with the person that you're now individualizing and giving them something that's important to them, you're going to get 40 hours of actual productivity in the 36 hours that you're going to be paying the same rate for. So, and it's all measurable, measure it in the outcomes, like you said. But now this person is a sphere of influence, an advocate for come here and work. Here's how they do
Well,
things.
and to your point, and if I have the factory, right, our
Yep.
labor that's on average 30% effective today, and I can move that needle to 70 or 80% because people are enjoying, maybe the individual job that they have can be, tiresome at times or whatever. But I'm not asking you to just show up at work because I need to have, attendance taking, but rather I'm focused on the work that you're doing. And to your point, now I'm also contributing time back to you, about your personal growth, whether that's personal,
Yeah.
professional growth, or even just personal growth. I mean, one of the things that I'm very, very proud of that we've done in our company is that ability to bring people forward and say, hey, we want you to be the best professional you can be. What are you interested in? Do you want to write a book? Do you want to be a podcaster? What's your passion? And how do we help get your passion linked to the work that you're doing with us? Because we want you to be passionate.
Exactly.
And if they're not, you know what they're doing? This is the really sad part. They're taking their quiet quitting. I'm not engaged. I do the bare minimum to keep my job because I need healthcare. Oh, guess what? I've got 2 side hustles going, and that's where my passion is, and that's where I'm putting my energy in, and that's where I'm making more money. But I'm using you, literally using you, Mr. Big Employer, because I need healthcare benefits because I can't afford them as an individual. Yada yada yada, or others. And
it's like under the radar, like we used to say. You're doing the minimum amount of work to retain what you just explained, and then the company is actually getting that back in production and productivity, right?
Right. Yep.
And they're accepting it. And like, look, it's not easy what we're talking about. You've got to, like we're saying, you got to go in and look at the individual. You got to go look at the individual situations for each of the companies and organizations as well.
You mean you just can't lead by having one town hall a year and saying this is the way it's going to be and then disappear for the rest of the year? Come on.
Look, the real key is just make sure you do one employee engagement survey, once a year, and you get an award that you can throw in the face of all your employees and say, look, you idiot, we do engage with you. We got this award.
We got this. I won't name names, but we got this great label that we can put on that says we're the most amazing place on the planet to work, and yet there's no data to support that. And Glassdoor reviews of your company say just the opposite. So what does that all mean?
Our stock is down 70% this year because revenue outlook but hey, we got this cool award. Obviously, we're being a bit facetious here, and like, look, there is no one size fits all plan. Wow. We've got to get back to senior leadership recognizing it and actually having the tolerance that they don't know everything with all of the different variables in the environment today, right? In the ecosystem today, and saying, can we take what worked in the past, the foundational ideation of what worked in the past, and modernize the way that it's done today? I think if you can ask yourself that question, and then you start solutioning it with your team, making them a part of it, you're going to be on a roadway to recovery. It's not going to be easy, but you've got to first start with self-recognition and saying,
right,
yes, did we do this before? Okay, let's just reevaluate it. I think that's the first step.
And I think there's always that you get that. Well, we did a 4-day work week 15 years ago and it didn't work out. And I'm like, okay, thanks for that.
Well, that's good.
Piece of data. Yeah,
well, nothing else has changed. Everything has been completely static for the last 15 years. So it's a valid argument.
Well, and even then, we could go into the details. Like, what was it, right? Like, was it just hours and attendance? The same type of conversation we're just having.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, here's an idea, Tim. If any of our listeners actually come across a comment like that, you can private message us with, whoever the individual is. We'll send them a copy of our Stop Doing Stupid Stuff book.
Yes, please. For those of you who haven't heard, we have a book. It's actually, just to take a little bit of an aside on that, we've had a lot of really positive feedback on our first book, Stop Doing Stupid Stuff. And we actually have several other books coming out in that same ecosystem around specific areas. So look for those. If you're interested in learning more about that, please subscribe. And if you have any questions or any feedback at all, other than please don't do this podcast anymore, it hurts my ears. That one we hear a lot, but so you don't need to continue to send those. No, we're just joking. This is a lot of fun. We're getting great feedback from people on the stuff that we're doing. But again, just to close out today, I think what we're really trying to get at is, look, outcomes need to be driven by the people that are doing the work, have the tools, capability, and support that they need to do the work, number one. Where they do the work may or may not be part of that. And if it is, then it's important that they're there and that they're on site, because that's what's needed, like a hotel, right? At least at this point, we're still not doing hotels virtually. So you need to have staff. You need to have people at the front desk. You need to have people clean rooms. You have to have engineering. You have to have security. So people have to be there and they have to be focused in doing the job that you're asking them to do. So think about that, but also think about what's really important. Is it that time check in and out, or is it that plus understanding what the work is and the outcomes, and around giving the people the support the tools and the resources they need to be successful.
Yep. No, I think you're spot on. It's going to be interesting to see how companies and countries just kind of adapt to the circumstances everybody's facing and
Well,
the innovation that I think is going to come out of all of this.
this is innovation time.
I hope we
Yeah.
figure it out, and I hope we experiment, learn, and expand. I think it's going to be a really interesting time.
Well, as the Chinese curse says, may we live in interesting times. And I think we are in those times. But also chaos is when disruption happens. And so for organizations that are less about, I want things to go back to the way they were, but more are looking forward and saying, how do I disrupt, improve, drive change so that I can be a successful leader rather than the performing follower? That's what I throw out to people right now. And you're not going to disrupt by just maintaining the status quo. Status quo and disruption don't go together. And I know disruption is a word that was super popular, 10 years ago. I think it's time again. And it's not about what the word is. It's about what it means, right?
Yeah.
It means getting in there, creating new business opportunities, engaging with customers in new and exciting ways. And when you do that, that's where success comes from, and energy, because people like being involved, and especially where they have a voice. So
right. That makes them feel like they're engaged with, instead of feeling like engaged 30% of the time. And to wrap it up too, don't think you've got to come up with something out of something that's new. The topic that we were talking about in the article that we'll post is, what Iceland did around their shortened work weeks. And so there's data that's out there. That's not a new idea. That's an idea that's been around for a couple of decades. It's just being applied in the right circumstances. So, think about that as you're collabing with your teams.
No, agreed. All right, sir. Well, thanks again for another insightful conversation. Hopefully our audience felt the same way. Please subscribe if you are intrigued in learning more about what we're doing. We're here on Spotify and YouTube, and looking forward to, we'll be back here next week.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.